Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith is an awesome action sci-fi drama film directed by the legendary George Lucas, released back in 2005. This movie is perfect, perfectly imperfect, and it is the culmination of the whole prequel trilogy and George's finale of Star Wars. This is the finale that he wanted, basically, and this closes off his whole story with the prequel trilogy, and the whole prequel trilogy was a dream come true for him. He was able to do things that he could not do in the 70s and 80s. Like it or not, it was a filmmaker's dream come true. And he even admitted that he was limited, not just limited by the technology of the time, he also held back on purpose. He avoided situations that would get him in trouble. Basically establish yourself before you go full express mode, I should say. And the prequel trilogy is when he finally got to do that. This is the moment he went full express mode, and this is the finale of that legacy, and I am so excited to talk about. So here we go, my full deep dive movie review of Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith. Prepare to be judged.
Wrong door.
So the main story, well, in the previous two prequels, Episode 1, it was about how Palpatine became Chancellor, and the story was told through the eyes of Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan. Episode 2 was about how Palpatine divided the Republic and created a crisis, which was the Clone War, to stay in office, which furthered the corruption and his overall influence over the whole Senate. And what better way to take control of the government when the government is completely divided? There's no better time. Episode 3 is obviously when he finally lays down the hammer and takes over the Republic, transforms it into the Empire, and also takes Anakin Skywalker as his apprentice to push things forward. Anakin was his instrument. Wow, this movie is tragic, so full of emotion, but it's got everything. It's got funny moments, it's got comedy, it's got beautiful scenery, amazing visual effects, awesome action scenes, very well composed sequences. So much work has been done in this movie. Let's start off with Anakin's story. So in the beginning of the movie, we see the shot of the old Star Destroyer, the Venator class Star Destroyer, but it was meant to be like an older version of what we would see in Episode 4. One of George's focuses in Episode 3 was to put a lot of things in the movie that would blend Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope together. And this was one of those moments where in Episode 4, remember, the first shot we saw was the Imperial Star Destroyer chasing Tantive 4 in the beginning, right? So he thought, well, let's start with the Star Destroyer, but it's like an older version, the Republic version of the Star Destroyer, going over Coruscant. And then we see the two ships go down. Now, if you notice, look real closely, when the Star Destroyer is flying over Coruscant, you notice that you don't see the space battle. This is interesting. This was a artistic choice of George. He said he wanted to reveal things one at a time. He first wanted to reveal the Star Destroyer as kind of a homage to Episode 4's beginning, right? You don't see the battle over Coruscant yet. It's a massive battle that it takes place almost in the entirety of the atmosphere of Coruscant. So you don't see the battle, you just see the Star Destroyer, and then you see the two Jedi starfighters go down, and that's obviously Anakin and Obi-Wan, right? He wanted something that speaks war, is war, and it really gets you into the situation of the galaxy at hand. And first you reveal the Star Destroyer, then you reveal the two main characters, and you have this awesome shot going down, they're flying over the Star Destroyer, and then all at once when they do that maneuver over the nose, that's when you see the battle. So even though that's not logical, right, because the battle was always there, the battle just basically appeared. It was a thematic, it was a creative decision, and honestly I like it. When I realized it, I'm like, okay, I really like it. It's an artistic choice, you know, that which fits with Star Wars, because Star Wars is both designed from the old matinee serials from the old 1930s, which were originally 12 episodes. They had like opening credit rolls, just like Star Wars did. Like the style, the acting, the story elements was all based on the style of those old matinee serials from the 30s. While also the movies were also designed to be like the old silent movies of the old 30s, 20s, where there was no dialogue. The story was told completely visually actually, where the dialogue, the sound effects, and John Williams' amazing score collectively were the background music. So the fact that this artistic choice of one at a time revealing the situation of the battle above Coruscant fits. This one shot going through the whole battle was amazing. There was even a part in that battle where they put a kitchen sink in there because Lucas said that one of his teammates, I think, someone told him, George, you have everything in this shot except the kitchen sink. So they put a kitchen sink in there and now they have everything. And the kitchen sink was that it was basically when the Republic ship shot a laser at the banking clan ship and it blew up, and then you see that debris and the camera follows the debris as it hits the ship. It looks like a piece of the ship, but it was actually a kitchen sink. But it was designed where you can't really tell it's a kitchen sink. It looks like a piece of debris from the ship, but it's a kitchen sink as kind of an Easter egg and a joke, if you will. We're going through the battle and we get closer to Grievous' ship. Then all at once the CIS launch these missiles that blow up and these little droids come out, the buzz droids. And George liked this idea because it was a interesting take on blowing things up. Like instead of a missile just hitting the ship and blowing it up, he's like, what if the missile just released these little droids and the droids just tear the ship up? He liked it because it was interesting and odd, and it was really cool, these little droids tearing up the ship. And then when Anakin tries to help Obi-Wan and take some of those droids out, obviously one gets on his ship, and George even said this is kind of R2-D2's action picture. He's like, he wouldn't get a chance to give R2 these cool moments in the second half, so it's better to do it now. And I love that he did that. R2 has always been George's favorite character, and you could see just how he treated him in the prequels. R2 always gets these heroic moments, and so I love that part when the buzz droid has a little standoff with R2. R2 kills the buzz droid, gives him a little heroic moment. Another thing too, this opening shot establishes that Anakin and Obi-Wan are partners. So like in episode 2, we saw they have a difficult relationship in episode 2, right? There is a close relationship. It was established in episode 2, but there was a difficult brother versus brother type thing going on there. Not brother versus brother, that happens later in the movie, but it's like brothers bickering. In this movie, they got over that. Now they're partners. Now they trust each other. There is still a little bit of that bantering that you see, bickering, I should say, that you see in the beginning of this movie, but more or less they are equal. George even said he wanted to establish no one's really in real authority because Anakin's no longer Obi-Wan's Padawan. He is a Jedi Knight, so he's essentially equal to Obi-Wan in status now. I mean, Obi-Wan still has seniority over him and he's a Jedi Master on the Jedi Council, but they are equal. George wanted the sense that these are partners, they both know what they're doing, and they're working together, which is important, especially when we go forward and what happens to the two at the end. Another thing that I like that George wanted to do that I think he pulled off well was you saw the clone troopers' reality into the war, which was important, especially going forward into Order 66. We needed to establish the reality of the clones. So when he had the part where the clones in the Arc 170s, by the way, that's my favorite Star Wars ship, he had the clones in the Arc 170s being established in this opening shot because he wanted to say, here's the clones. They are in a war, and even though they're a very powerful army, they're not immortal. They do die, and so you show the clone troopers struggling in this war. You see a lot of their ships get destroyed. It really got us into the fact of war's going on. The casualties are high. The stakes are high. Yeah, this shot was meant to say the Clone Wars, it's raging. It's on. So now we get to Grievous' ship, and they crash land, and they take out the droids in the hangar. Lucas is establishing that these two are partners. They also know how each other works. They've been working together for years, and he shows that these guys know how to work together. When he's like, it's a trap, Anakin's like, and the next move, spring the trap. They've done this so many times. They know what they're doing, and they give R2 the comm so he can stay with the ship in the hangar. And this is also George's excuse to give R2 more moments to shine in the movie, just to have his funny moments, because George loves R2. So they're going through the ship looking for the Chancellor. They're on their way to the top of the spire, to the observation platform. They're going through the ship, they're on the elevator, and then you got that funny part with the elevator where R2 is pissing off Obi-Wan because he makes the elevator go down, and then he stops it. Obi-Wan falls over and makes it shoot up, and he's like, that's better. And then you have that funny moment where R2 shoots the oil in the face of those super battle droids and burns them up, and Lucas wanted that in there because he wanted like a really kiddie, childish joke in there for the young audience to have fun with, to establish that yes, there's a lot more darker themes. He also want to establish this is still a kids movie, or at least it's trying to be a kids movie the best it can be. Yeah, I absolutely love that. And so now they get to the observatory platform. They see the Chancellor, and Count Dooku comes in. And this moment was to show how far Anakin has come, right? Because in episode 2, he was powerful, but he wasn't quite there yet. He still had much to learn, and you know, he got his arm cut off, whatever. Now he's got a mechanical arm. So he basically gets his rematch with Dooku. I know the Clone Wars came after, and Anakin fought Dooku again in there, but before that came out, this originally was Anakin's second bout. I don't really like to argue logic in movies. Movie logic's a thing, so I'm not arguing logic. This is something else to make fun of, is when Count Dooku throws Obi-Wan against that balcony, and then he like force pulls the balcony on top of Obi-Wan. Every time I see that, I'm like, ow, because it looks like it's crushing his legs. Seriously, his legs are toast in real life. Like when you really look at the balcony, it's like on his legs, like his legs are cut off. But hey, moving on. Dooku is a powerful Sith Lord, as he established in episode 2. He took on Anakin and Obi-Wan and beat them, and then he took on Yoda, and it ended up in a stalemate. So he is powerful. Lucas establishing that in episode 2 was necessary so that we could see how far Anakin came when he did defeat Dooku. Straight up. Boy, was that dark when he cut his head off. But in that moment, Palpatine was like killing Anakin, one of the most memed scenes ever in Star Wars almost. So this scene was to show Palpatine further manipulating Anakin to the dark side. Palpatine wants Anakin as his apprentice because Anakin is Palpatine's perfect weapon to carry out his plan, basically. George Lucas said himself, this fight with Dooku in the beginning, it was the moment where he showed how far he's come in power, but it was also Palpatine testing Anakin. So he's telling him to do something that he knows is wrong. Palpatine was pressuring Anakin in killing Dooku because it's wrong, further assuring him that he did well. He did the right thing. You know, you did right, Anakin. He was a Sith Lord. You killed him. You know, he disarmed Dooku. He's disarmed. It's wrong to kill an unarmed person, Sith or not. He knew it wasn't the Jedi way, but he did it anyway. And then now you got Palpatine assuring him he did the right thing. And then he connects with them on a personal level, talking about his mother and the Sand People. This is classic Palpatine and manipulation tactics. First, you get someone to do something wrong, assure them that what they did was actually right, even though it was actually wrong. And then you connect them on a personal level so they feel comfortable. And then he even tries to manipulate Anakin against Obi-Wan. He tried to get Anakin to leave Obi-Wan, saying, leave him or we'll never make it. But of course, Anakin's like, his fate is the same as ours. So at this point, Palpatine knows he did get his hooks in him a little bit, but he's got a ways to go to fully turn Anakin to the dark side. Now that they're leaving the observatory, they're on the elevator, and then once the movie cuts to this really cool sequence of the clone Star Destroyer and General Grievous's flagship fighting side by side. I really like that. They said it was a callback to how ships used to fight in the 1700s, like, you know, galleons fighting side by side next to each other. And so it was cool to see that. When you really think about it, we never really saw it close up like that. So it was cool that George showed that. We saw a little bit of it in Return of the Jedi, but it wasn't like in depth like we saw. Like we saw this ship's broadside in Return of the Jedi, but it wasn't like what we saw in Revenge of the Sith. So I love space battles and sci-fi movies. They're always so cool. This is probably the best space battle in any movie and any video game ever made, is a space battle above Coruscant. So much going on. It's epic. Awesome. And they're going down the elevator after that broadside battle. It took out the stabilizers and caused the ship to go vertical. So as the ship is going down, Anakin just started to run down the elevator shaft. Then when Grievous ordered the emergency booster engines, started to restabilize the ship, obviously the elevator started going more vertical. Anakin started to fall. And then that funny scene when Obi-Wan woke up, he's like, ah, and he's like, Anakin didn't let go, but then you gotta remember that's his mechanical arm. But yeah, and then you have Obi-Wan just hanging there, and then they do that cool thing as they're falling down because the elevator's coming at them, and then they do their little rappel ropes and they launch themselves onto the floor. They get caught in the ray shields, and George Lucas liked this idea of ray shields. It was a simple trap to get into, but they realized, you know what, this is actually our way of getting closer to Grievous. And then you had that funny shot of R2 coming into the room and slamming into the wall, gets kicked over by a super battle droid. Oh, I also love, going back to when the ship was tipping over. I love that part when R2 is in the hangar and he's just just flying down the hangar. Oh god, yeah, R2 really did get his moments in this movie, so I love that. Now we're in the command bridge and we are introduced to our new villain, General Grievous. George Lucas wanted Grievous. He didn't want Grievous to be like a powerful villain like Count Dooku or Darth Maul or Darth Vader. He wanted him to be like a cowardly, cunning, slimy villain. That's the type of villain Grievous is. As long as he feels he's safe, he'll fight, but once he feels cornered, then he kind of like moves out of the way, like gets out of there. Another thing about his character was his cough. George Lucas had bronchitis during the recording of Grievous's lines with the voice actor. When they were creating the character together, George Lucas had a cough and they integrated the cough to it, so that's why he's like it wasn't explained in the movie, but you can kind of think, oh, he's got the cough because his mechanics don't work very well. This is like an earlier cyborg and whatever. So also George liked Grievous because having him as a cyborg was reminiscent of what Anakin would become. He didn't want him to look like Vader. He just wanted to be kind of relative and reminiscent to what Vader would become. And this is obviously a less advanced cyborg than what Vader was. And he also said that Vader has artificial breathing with the Vader suit. Grievous has asthma, basically. So yeah, I really like that. Oh, also another thing about Grievous that was interesting is he obviously has killed a lot of Jedi. Part of his character was introducing that he has killed a lot of Jedi. He takes Anakin and Obi-Wan's lightsabers and adds them to his collection. You see his collection of lightsabers because obviously he's killed a lot of Jedi and added it to his collection. So that right there establishes himself as a threatening villain. Then you have to wonder, how the hell does he kill Jedi? And then of course, the battle on the bridge happens. George liked the idea of having another weapon that can actually fight Jedi. The CIS developed droids that can actually fight Jedi. So they have these Magna Guard droids meant to guard Grievous. They have these special staffs that can actually fight a lightsaber. So that was a really cool idea. Then when Grievous escapes and launches all the escape pods and escapes, now we're at the really awesome crash landing sequence. The crash landing sequence was, wow, so spectacular. And the visual effects supervisor said this was a very hard shot to put together and get it right and get it to look good. And when the ship actually crash lands, you see that shot. When it's crash landing, you have the shot looking right at the ship, right? The ship comes right at you, and all once you end up in the ship. That was Lucas paying an homage to Steven Spielberg, his best friend, because Steven Spielberg loves shots like that. And then of course Obi-Wan's another happy landing. So they end up in the Senate. They return Chancellor to the Senate, and that's when they declare that the Senate will continue to vote to continue the war until Grievous is dead. Even with Count Dooku dead, Grievous is now the leader of the droid army. What that says to me, that's Palpatine saying he will not stop the war till Grievous is dead because he's not ready to lay down the hammer yet. He's trying to buy time so he can strike at the right moment. And then this is also when Anakin saw Padme for the first time. By the way, this is another point I make fun of Revenge of the Sith. Anakin comes back after the Outer Rim sieges and learns his wife is pregnant. How far along is she, and how long was he in the Outer Rim sieges? I ask this because it's like Padme was having some fun behind the scenes. I don't know. I just like to make fun of it. George obviously did that because he wanted his opening, so I guess he left you to figure out how that works. So in my mind, before he left for the Outer Rim sieges, he's like, hey Padme, let's get it on because I ain't gonna see you for a while. And then goes, fights the war, gets called back to Coruscant because Palpatine is kidnapped, and then crash lands in Coruscant. Now we see each other again. Boom, she's pregnant. That's how it happened. That's how it happened in my head canon. So I know, of all things I could think about, that's what I think about. But I love that scene because she says, I'm pregnant, and of course that's Luke and Leia. And also when you look at her, and he could feel it, it's like, so it's obviously she's a little far along. So it seems like she's in the end of the pregnancy. She does look a little big and stuff. When you think about it, she's probably like 7-8 months in the pregnancy. They got it on before he left to the Outer Rim Sieges, and he was gone for like a half a year and then came back, and now boom. So I guess that makes sense. I was just having fun. So he says, this is the happiest moment of my life. Story moves on. And then next time we see Anakin with Padme, you see them on that balcony. Now, think about that balcony scene. That scene was added later. When George Lucas was looking at the final, like not the final cut, but the rough cut of the movie when they're cutting things together, he realized he was missing something. He needed a scene where Anakin and Padme were happy. They're a happy couple. They're talking about their plans for the future, like setting up the baby's room, living on Naboo, retire from all this political Jedi war nonsense, expressing their love to each other. It's literally the only scene we see that, because in all the other scenes it's all depressing, dramatic, but none of them is like when they're happy. And I think that's important because in episode 2 we see them happy together, but when they declare the love for one another, it's all dramatic. So we never seen them happy as husband and wife, and this is the only time. Good thing that George had that, because it adds that more flavor to the story, that this is a happy couple that eventually gets torn apart in the end. Then of course the next scene, he has the nightmare of Padme dying in childbirth. In his dream she's saying, Anakin, help me, help me. George actually showed the nightmare this time. In episode 2 he was having the nightmares of his mother, but you never saw the nightmares. You just saw him having nightmares, or he talks about the nightmares. And this one he actually showed the nightmares, so you're actually seeing what Anakin's seeing in his premonitions. They're just like these little blurry visions, right? And he gets up from bed, he's stressed out. The first moment in a trilogy that pushes him closer to the dark side was when he left his mother in slavery. The second time is when he lost his father figure, Qui-Gon. The third time was when he lost his mother. The fourth time was when he declared his love for Padme, right? Because now he has an attachment he could lose. And he already shown that he is not okay with losing things. He's not okay with letting the natural of order things happen. He doesn't have the strength to let go when he loves. So we know that's going to be bad in the future. Well, herein lies the fifth part that pushes him even closer to the dark side. Because this is what starts to stress him out, to cause him to have conflict and confusion. And he doesn't know where he's at, what's up and down, because now he is starting to lose the only thing he has left. And she happens to be pregnant with his child at the same time too, which adds on to the stress. He doesn't know what to do. He doesn't know who he could trust, who he could go to. He's just got to live with the fact that he's going to lose his wife, because the premonitions he has of that is the same premonitions he had of his mother dying. So there's no reason to believe that this isn't going to come true too. This is the second to last moment that pushes him closer. Now we're getting to the part where his guard is down. He's weak, he's vulnerable, and then we cut to the scene where he's talking to Yoda about these premonitions, but he's also careful not to tell Yoda that it's Padme, because, you know, Jedi can't fall in love. He's forbidden to marry, all that kind of stuff. But Yoda, I feel he's always suspected that Anakin and Padme are together. See, for me, I think Yoda never really agreed with the fact. He probably always believed that part of the problem why Jedi often leave is because they're not allowed to have attachments to people. What often happens is when people have attachments and they lose them, they go off into darkness. He just doesn't know how to really fix the problem with how does he train people to have attachments but let them go when the natural order of life is about to take them from you. So when Yoda said train yourself to let go of everything you fear to lose, he wasn't saying you can't love anyone. To me, what that was saying is you love this person, you care about this person, but you can't do anything about the natural order. This person's gonna die and you must let go. And that's why he said rejoice those who become one with the Force. Mourn them, do not miss them, do not, because they're always with you. There's no need to mourn them. There's no need to miss them. They're always with you in the Force, in life or death. But Anakin can't get past that. He lost his mother. This guy has lost so much and now he's about to lose everything. He can't get his head around that. Even though he knows he should, he knows it's wrong, he just can't. He goes to Obi-Wan, and Obi-Wan just had a briefing of the Outer Rim Sieges, and then he tells Anakin that Palpatine has summoned him. So then he goes to Palpatine's office, this. Palpatine did this on purpose because he wanted to spread division and confusion. He appointed Anakin to be Palpatine's personal representative on the Jedi Council. He would have to be a Jedi Master, a member of the Council, and he would have to attend all of Palpatine's meetings as well as the Council meetings and report to the Chancellor what's going on. This, of course, pisses the Jedi off because they already suspect Palpatine. They know that he's corrupt, they don't like him, and now Palpatine put his foot in the door and now they're like, what? There's already mistrust between Mace Windu, the head of the Jedi Council, and Anakin, because Mace Windu was there the day that Yoda was tapping into Anakin and knew that Anakin was going through something and did something bad. Like I said, they don't know what he did exactly. They don't know that he killed the Tuskens. But when he killed the Tuskens after losing his mom, Yoda knew that something happened. Mace Windu was there, and ever since then, he didn't trust Anakin because all that moment did was prove Mace Windu right. What he told Qui-Gon back in episode 1, he's too old. And what they meant by that is he's too old. He already has attachments. If he loses them, he's just going to attach himself and he's going to be in pain and anguish, which is a dangerous thing for the Jedi to have a powerful Force user and all that anguish. That's textbook recipe for a Sith Lord right there. That's how they look at it. Mace Windu never trusted Anakin after that. Palpatine knew that. So he knew that this would cause further division between Anakin and Windu. So when he went to that council meeting to tell the council what Palpatine did, Windu said, you're on this council, but we don't grant you the rank of master. Palpatine knew that would happen. That's what he wanted because he wanted more confusion and pain and anguish in Anakin. Another thing is, it wasn't quite explained how Palpatine knew. I haven't heard George Lucas explain how Palpatine knew that Padme was going to die through Anakin's premonitions. The only thing I could think of is, since Palpatine's a master manipulator, he kind of has a subtle power to read minds a little bit. So I think he was able to tap into Anakin's mind. He realized that he's in so much pain and suffering that because he's afraid his wife would die. So of course, behind the scenes, Palpatine probably smirked and was like, I've got a plan. And he would prey on that confusion. So now we got a situation where Anakin is going to lose his wife, everything he loves and holds dear. And now there's division and mistrust between him and the Jedi Council, an organization that he pledged his life and service to. Another thing is, there's, even though Obi-Wan and him are more brothers than they ever have been, Obi-Wan still has a little mistrust in Anakin. Not that he doesn't trust him. Obi-Wan trusts Anakin with his life. It's just more of, he can also see that there's something going on with him and Palpatine, and he also doesn't know what it is. He was the one that was told by Count Dooku that Darth Sidious controls the Republic, but the Jedi don't know how. They don't know if Palpatine is Sidious. They don't know if Sidious just has control of the majority of the Senate and is controlling the Republic that way, or whatever. They don't know because the dark side has clouded their vision, my friend, like Count Dooku said. But there's just so much suspicion around Palpatine because he's stayed in office long after his term has expired. There's just something off about this guy. It's not that Obi-Wan doesn't trust him. I feel like he's more concerned. The Council doesn't trust him, but Obi-Wan is concerned. He's worried about him. He doesn't want anything to happen to Anakin, and he doesn't want Anakin to do anything rash. He also knows something's troubling him. He also knows he's in a lot of stress, you know? And you can also see Obi-Wan is trouble because the Council ordered Obi-Wan to tell Anakin to spy on the Chancellor. He didn't want to do that. That's why he said, Anakin, I'm on your side. I didn't want to put you in this situation. And of course, that causes more conflict. And again, Palpatine probably counted on the Council to do something like that. And that would cause more conflict with Anakin, more confusion. You see what's going on here? It's like you're removing layers of Anakin's internal defenses so that when the time is right, Palpatine will swoop in there and say, you are now my apprentice. And there's nothing Anakin could do. He's gonna prey on Anakin when Anakin's at his absolute lowest. And it's tragic and sad to see. The next scene, Obi-Wan's telling Yoda and Mace Windu that Anakin isn't really happy with what they want him to do. And Mace Windu reaffirms his mistrust for Anakin, saying, very dangerous putting them together. I don't trust him. And I love this scene when Obi-Wan's like, with all due respect, Master, is he not the chosen one? Is he not to destroy the Sith and bring balance to the Force? I love that because you see see Obi-Wan's loyalty to Anakin. He's got his back 100%. He's the chosen one. And then Yoda's like, got misread the prophecy could have been. And Obi-Wan, he's not saying these Jedi are wrong, but he's also has absolute belief and love for Anakin. So that's when he says he won't let me down. He never has. So now we go forward, and then now we're at, I love this part. They're at the opera. The opera that Palpatine is watching. George Lucas came up with his idea to call it Squid Lake, performed by the Mon Calamari water dancers. And when you look at it, it's like this bubble of water in zero gravity, and you got the Mon Calamari performers, and if you look closely, you can actually see the Mon Calamari swimming in there and dancing and stuff. I thought that was a cool idea. That scene was another afterthought, because originally the scene where Palpatine tells Anakin about Darth Plagueis the Wise was actually in Palpatine's office. Almost every scene where Palpatine is further manipulating Anakin, it's always in Palpatine's office. He wanted it to be a little different. They came up with this idea of an opera in Star Wars, which is absolutely gorgeous, by the way. The opening painting shot that you first see the opera is one of my favorite shots. It just looks so beautiful and really awesome. A crazy scene for Star Wars. It was so un-Star Wars-like, and George Lucas loved it. Furthermore, there's a reason why that scene happens to be one of the most popular, if not the most popular, exposition scenes, talking scenes of the whole franchise, because of how un-Star Wars-like it is, how different it is. It's the most different scene we've ever seen that actually fits in the movie. I mean, all the scenes fit in the movie. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying this is a different scene than what we're used to in Star Wars that fits in the movie. And of course, this is a scene where he reveals that they found General Grievous. He's on the Utapau system. He's like, you're the best choice to do this. You know, another manipulation tactic, because of course he knows Anakin's going to tell the council this, and then the council's be like, no, and it's going to cause more confusion and division. But it's also, I feel like Palpatine sensed in Anakin his pain and the reason behind it. This is where Palpatine drops his first hammer. Because now he's like, this is his biggest manipulation tactic, is telling him a story of a power that could save people from death. Wow, how convenient, right? Just what Anakin needed to hear. And Palpatine knew that. Again, classic manipulation. You cause division, you cause someone to think wrongly, even though they think it's wrong, assure them it's right, and then you connect with them on a personal level. And before saying that, before telling Anakin of that power, you know, they had the whole conversation about good and evil, the point of views and all that. And so they had that argument, and then he tells him about the power. Again, manipulation. He's causing division and pain for Anakin, then saying everything's gonna be okay. I'm your friend. I will get you out of it. And here's a way to help you with your predicament. Palpatine doesn't reveal he knows about Padme's upcoming death, but he basically tells him a convenient time, hey, here's a way you could save her. And of course, Anakin's curious about this. And that whole scene when he's telling the story of Darth Plagueis, this acting is so amazing. The thing is, Ian McDiarmid had laryngitis during this scene. His voice was off and stuff, but he still pulled off that scene. And George Lucas liked it because it gave a unique sound to Ian's voice in this already unique scene. Another thing is they didn't loop that scene, they didn't cut that scene, all of it was original. Yeah, there's a reason why people love that scene so much, because of how unique it is. And it was also just beautiful timing. I'm not saying Ian McDiarmid being sick is beautiful timing, but at the same time it kind of is in a guilty way. I'm just saying all the pieces came to place at the right time and created such an awesome scene. And then ended with one of the badass lines ever. Is it possible to learn this power? Not from a Jedi. Dang! Like, so cool. You couldn't do better than that. So perfect. And then they go to the next scene when Anakin tells the council that General Grievous is on Utapau, and that he said the Chancellor requested that I lead the campaign. That's when Mace Windu says, no, we make those decisions. And then they say Kenobi should go. The next scene we see with Anakin and Obi-Wan always makes me sad, because it literally is the last time that Anakin and Obi-Wan see each other as friends, because the next time they see each other, they're enemies. So it always breaks my heart when I see that scene, because that's the last time you see the brothers together as brothers. And I love that scene because, you know, in this scene, Anakin still has jealousy and problems. He's still confused. He's still in pain and a lot of stress. So he still thinks Obi-Wan has something against him, but he doesn't want to think that, because it's wrong. Everyone gets this way where they feel something, but it's not their thought, because quite literally it's not. This is all the thoughts and feelings Palpatine is putting in his head, trying to corrupt him. So he doesn't actually think Obi-Wan doesn't trust him, but he feels it because that's what Palpatine wants. This is Palpatine's manipulations, these seeds that he planted in Anakin's head, talking to him, while at the same time he's gonna lose his wife and like all of this. So he's got this conflict underneath, but he doesn't want it. In this scene, this is him basically saying, I don't want there to be division between me and my best friend. So that's when he talks to Obi-Wan and apologizes for his arrogance, not being appreciative of his training, basically telling how much he appreciates everything that Obi-Wan has done for him. And I love this part because this is when Obi-Wan just assures him everything's gonna be okay. He's very proud of him and that he became a far greater Jedi than he could ever hope to be, told him to be patient and that it won't be long till the Jedi Council makes him a master. And then that final moment where Anakin says, may the Force be with you, and then Obi-Wan says, goodbye, old friend, and may the Force be with you. That was it. It was the last time you saw those two together as friends, because after that, the next time they see each other is on Mustafar when they fight each other. So after that scene in Anakin's plot, Anakin goes home, and then the next thing we see of Anakin, he has another premonition, but his premonition is upgrading where Obi-Wan's starting to be a part of it. George Lucas at first wanted to develop a sort of jealousy between Anakin and Obi-Wan, but he went away from that and more for the fact that by the time we see Obi-Wan on Mustafar, he believed Padme brought Obi-Wan there to kill him because of all his anger and frustrations and arrogance and rationalizing that everything he's doing is right even though he knows it's wrong, but he's rationalizing because he can't undo what he already did, all that kind of stuff. In this next scene when he talks to Padme, he says, Obi-Wan's been here, hasn't he? And then she's like, he came here this morning, says you were under a lot of stress, he's worried about you. And this is when he tells Padme, I've found a way to save you, I feel lost, and promises not to lose her. I forgot to also talk about there's a scene a little earlier with him and Padme. It took place after Obi-Wan told Anakin to spy on the Chancellor. So it was like between that and the opera. So I kind of skipped ahead a little bit. This is the first scene where you saw there's a little bit of division with Anakin and Padme, because Padme obviously sees that there's corruption. She's basically saying, have you ever thought we're fighting on the wrong side and that Republic has become the very evil we sworn to destroy? And of course, Anakin's like, I don't believe that, and you're sounding like a separatist. She's not quite a separatist. I'll get to that later, but George removed some scenes that I wish would have stayed. The movie's still perfect, even with those removed, but I think the movie would have been more perfect with those scenes there. It's like one of the few times I disagree with George Lucas, but I understand why he did it. But there was a series of scenes where Padme was with the senators, Mon Mothma, Bail Organa, and a few other senators, and that was meant to foreshadow the early creation of what would eventually be the Rebel Alliance. They weren't the Rebel Alliance yet, they were just a band of senators that were trying to fix the problems within the Senate. They didn't want to separate from the Senate, they didn't want to go to the separatists because they don't agree with them either. They essentially want to create their own faction to correct the problems that are going on in the Republic. And obviously, Mon Mothma, Bail Organa, we know these to be the original senators of the Rebel Alliance, right? He removed those scenes because he wanted to focus more on Anakin's story and turn the dark side and saving Padme. I usually agree with the scenes that he removes because of flow and pacing and things that just are too long and slow that don't need to be there. This doesn't really seem to draw anything back. Matter of fact, it adds to the movie, I thought. And it added to Padme's story more, and I liked it, and I wish he would have kept them in there. Now we're in the part in the Jedi Temple where they're in the war room or whatever, and then they get a report from Commander Cody saying that Kenobi has engaged General Grievous. They've begun the attack. Windu orders Anakin to report to the Chancellor, and that his reaction to the news would give him a clue of his intentions. And then when Anakin leaves in that scene, Windu says, I sense a plot to destroy the Jedi. The dark side surrounds the Chancellor, and then they said that he must forcibly removed from office if he does not give up his emergency powers after the destruction of Grievous. And then Yoda warns, this will lead to a dark place and we must take great care with this. So now we cut to the scene where Anakin is in Chancellor's office, and this is a big scene because this is where Anakin learns Palpatine is a Sith Lord. Palpatine continues to corrupt him, saying, they don't trust you, Anakin. They see your power and that you'll be too strong to control. Don't you wonder why they don't make you a Jedi Master? He just keeps on going. And then he tells him, let me help you to know the subtleties of the Force. Basically reveals he is the Sith Lord. And then he's like, I know it's been troubling you. Listen to me. Don't continue to be a pawn of the Jedi Council. Learn my powers to save Padme. And that's when Anakin freaks out. What did you say? How did you know that? Like, this is a big moment for him. It adds on to the stress. He's got a choice to make here. Does he turn in Palpatine or does he follow him? Well, in this moment, he just doesn't know, but he still decides to do the right thing, but he's confused and conflicted, but he says, I'm going to turn you over to the Jedi Council. And that scene was great, by the way. I love that scene. Really good lines, really good exposition. Anyways, he goes to Windu. And before I talk more about this scene, in this particular shot, I love the lighting in the background and the design of this hangar in there. I just love this area that they're in because, I don't know, the lighting and everything, very beautifully composed shot. I understand it's all CGI, but there's models involved and stuff. There's more sophistication to that than just animating things on a computer. It's still really awesome. Anyway, moving on. So Anakin tells Windu that he's a Sith Lord, and then Windu says, if what you told me is true, you'll ever gain my trust. That is another emotional part for me because it's like, I really like that because Windu sees that Anakin is devoted to the council. Windu sees that, and so he genuinely said, you'll ever gain my trust. I love that in a very emotional way because, of course, what happens later when he turns on Windu, it's just kind of tragic. Right when Windu trusts him again, Anakin made the choice in the heat of the moment. Before we get there, though, we get to another scene that was added later, but Lucas wanted to put this in there because he needed another scene to remind the audience of what's going on. You know, you got all this corruption with Palpatine. You got all this mind games. You got the division between him and the Jedi Council. We're in this next scene to remind us that the real culprit between Anakin's fall to darkness, his fear of losing his wife. He needs to save Padme. So in this next scene, we have this really beautiful shot with music. John Williams makes this really eerie music that you haven't heard in any of his other films. It's remarkable. John Williams is a god of music. More on that later. In this scene, there's no dialogue, and he's telling a story of, I don't want to lose my wife. You have this moment where he's looking across Coruscant, and then it cuts to Padme in her apartment, looking across Coruscant towards the Jedi Temple, and you could see what George Lucas is telling you without him saying anything, that the stakes are high. He's gonna lose his wife, and he doesn't want to, especially since she's pregnant with his kid. He's got a choice to make. This is also the most stressful point in his life because this is where he thinks of everything. This is what I love scenes about this, is because you can imagine what's going through these characters' thoughts when they have these deep exposition scenes where nothing's said. You can imagine what's going in their head. At this point, I can imagine Anakin thinking about everything. He's thinking of how he left his mother to slavery. He's thinking of how he lost his father, Qui-Gon. He's thinking of how he lost his mother in his arms and killing the Tuscans out of anger. He's thinking of how when he first pledged his love to Padme, he's thinking of how he promised his mother, he swore on his mother's grave he would never let it happen again, meaning he would never let it happen to Padme, the last person that he loves. He fell in love with her. He's thinking of losing her, his nightmares. Then, of course, he's also thinking of the Jedi not trusting him, the divisions with him and the Jedi, Council not making a master. They don't trust him. They deny his power. And then he makes a choice. But the choice he has to make, it's not an easy one. If any of you have played chess, it's like being put in a fort. You either lose this piece or you lose this piece. Which piece do you lose? Either way, you're losing something. If he sides with the Jedi, then he potentially loses Palpatine and then loses his one chance of saving his wife. But if he chooses his wife, helps Palpatine, he loses trust with the Jedi. He goes against everything he swore an oath to. He made a commitment. It's a really hard choice for him to make. Instead of making a definite choice, what he chooses to do is to go against Windu's orders to at least go to the Senate and see what he can do. He hasn't really made up his mind yet. So he goes up there, and then now we get cut into another really big scene. Originally, this scene was made to where, originally it was written where Windu didn't know that Palpatine was a Sith yet. When he tries to arrest Palpatine, Palpatine just reveals it by activating his lightsaber. And so it's like a surprise. But Lucas liked the idea better that now that Anakin told Windu that Palpatine's a Sith Lord, it actually hits better because now you see the look on Windu's face. He's in there for business now because he knows that Palpatine's a Sith Lord now. So he goes in there, says you're under arrest, Senate will decide his fate, and then he sees Palpatine activate his lightsaber, and then that confirms Anakin's suspicions. Windu realizes Anakin was right. It's time to throw down, and Palpatine kills those Jedi. I get it. People don't like that. They feel, oh, Saci Tin, Edith Koth, and who's the other guy? Kit Fisto. They died so easy. All right, for one, Lucas wanted to add that fight to have more of a close-up with Ian McDiarmid to say, hey, this is Ian McDiarmid. He didn't want it to look too fakey. So this was like one of the few times that Lucas went against Nick Gilliard saying, we need to do something different. What Lucas was trying to convey with the camera angles and all this was Palpatine was very fast and tricky. So he killed him easily because he tricked him, you know, with his growls and his sliminess and stuff. He was able to get into him real quick and kill him very quickly. And the reason Mace Windu didn't die so quickly is because he's considered to be the greatest swordsman in the Order. So he was able to hold his own. So you had a really cool lightsaber duel between Sam Jackson and Ian McDiarmid. Another thing is like making that lightsaber fight was a little hard because Nick Gilliard planned something different. George Lucas didn't want what Nick Gilliard wanted to do with this. I guess there was like a confusion. Nick Gilliard misunderstood, I guess, when he was creating these fight sequences before they shot on the real set. I guess originally it was going to be like a faster fight, and Lucas didn't want that. So they actually had to create this fight on set. So Sam Jackson had to adjust what he trained for that day. George Lucas essentially took the reins as stunt coordinator, and then Nick Gilliard did his best to help George create the scene he wanted. And it ended up working quite well, I thought. But now that we established that the fight's over, Windu actually beats him. Anakin comes in, and then of course Palpatine's pleading with Anakin, the Jedi are taking over, and I was right. Save me, Anakin. Save me, Anakin. He starts shocking Windu. Windu's pleading with him, don't listen to him. Palpatine's pleading with him, I have the power to save the one you love, don't let him kill me. And then as he's shocking him, the bolts are coming back, deforming his face, and that's when you see Palpatine turning into the Emperor that we know him as in Return of the Jedi. And then when Windu says, I'm going to end this once for all, Anakin says, you can't, he must stand trial. Mace Windu wasn't going to have it. And I like this because it shows that any Jedi can have dark side intentions, because the look of Mace Windu's face as he's about to cut Palpatine down, this is the moment where Anakin's hand was forced. He had to choose, and he chose Padme, of course. And in doing so, his choice guided his hand, activated his lightsaber, and cut off Windu's hand. That part was always shocking to me, quite literally, because Windu got shocked to death. Another memeable scene was power, unlimited power. I love that, because Palpatine is the evil guy, and this was Palpatine's moment and George's moment to have a dramatic evil moment. This is the best place to put it. I really liked having that in there. Now we get to Anakin turning to the dark side. I remember when I first went in to see this movie, I knew Anakin would turn to the dark side, but I always wondered, what does it look like for a Jedi to turn to the dark side? We've never seen it happen until now. We've only ever seen Jedi being Sith Lords and saying we turned to the dark side at some point. We never watched it happen. George Lucas went with making a pact with the devil style. In this moment, he just chose against the Jedi. He has nowhere to go. He is lost. He is more confused than ever before. But he's got comfort in the hopes that he could save Padme. Palpatine reveals there that I can't teach you this yet because I don't know it, but we'll discover the secret later. What I took from that was Palpatine, he may have known it or he didn't know it. Palpatine had no intention in the first place to teach Anakin how to save Padme. Matter of fact, he's banking on Padme dying anyway, because he needs Padme to die so that he can turn Anakin to the dark side. It's better to control someone at their absolute lowest. He tricked him. Like the devil, he tricked him. That's why George said he went with a pact with the devil, because Palpatine is the devil. And what does the devil do? He tricks people. The power to save people from death probably does exist, but that doesn't matter because it's against Palpatine's best interest to teach that to Anakin. And of course, Anakin turns to the dark side, and then Palpatine declares that all Jedi, including the younglings and everyone, including his best friend Obi-Wan, are now enemies of the Republic. And you can see that when Anakin says says, I understand, Master. He's just starting to fall to darkness, but he still has a little bit of resistance. So he's like, I understand, Master. Like, there's a little resistance to that. Then Palpatine orders him to go to the Jedi Temple and kill all the Jedi. And that's what happens. Now we see the consequence is the fall of the Jedi. This is the revenge of the Sith. The Order 66 sequence is great. I loved it. Seeing all the Jedi getting killed and blown away and betrayed. When I was 14 in the theater watching this with my dad and my uncle, and holy shit. As a teenager, I thought the world was ending. You know, this was my world. This is the world I lived in as a teenager. And to me, the world was ending because the Jedi are falling. There's no more Jedi. The Sith is taking everything over now. And then the next time you see him, he's at Padme's apartment. And this is when he tells her the lie. He's lying to her, saying the Jedi tried to overthrow the Republic, which they didn't. They were trying to arrest a corrupt bureaucrat, obviously. And I saw Mace Windu try to kill the Chancellor myself. I had to intervene, and I will not betray the Republic. My loyalties lie with the Chancellor, with the Senate, and with you, Padme. And then she asked, what about Obi-Wan? I don't know. Many Jedi have been killed. He's lying to her. He knows that Obi-Wan's his enemy because Palpatine told him to. I don't think this is a forced scene. I don't think this is going too fast, because you got to realize he went from making the decision against the Jedi to now he just killed a bunch of Jedi. By this point, he's already more evil than he ever was before. So I think that's a perfect transition from scene to scene. And then he says, I'm going to Mustafar system to take care of the Separatist leaders. Wait for me when I return. And then he goes. And then we see Anakin. He's standing on that balcony in Mustafar. By the way, I love Mustafar. Mustafar is an awesome planet. I love how Mustafar looks in Revenge of the Sith. This is the true Mustafar. And the culture is interesting. George designed the culture where the Mustafarians, they're collecting energy. Those are energy collectors, and they collect the energy from the lava. I thought that was cool. I really like that. You see Anakin standing on this balcony to John Williams' awesome score. And this is, Lucas explained it like this. This was the first time that Anakin got a moment to himself after everything that's happened to really contemplate what's happened. He's thinking about everything he's done. He's evil. He's done all these bad things, but it's painful to him. And that's why when you see him with that tear on his face, because he's emotionally conflicted. He betrayed everything he stood for to save Padme. He also doesn't know how Padme is going to accept this. Palpatine has no intention of teaching Anakin the power to save her. He's just a tricked slave servant of Palpatine. And it's just really tragic when you get to this point. Beautiful, beautiful scene. Just super emotional. This movie is top tier emotions. Padme goes to Mustafar because Obi-Wan came to visit her, told her that he's looking for him because he's turned to the dark side and all that. He's killed younglings. And then she says, you're going to kill him, aren't you? And he says, he's become a very great threat. When Padme takes off from Coruscant, you could see Obi-Wan sneaking up on her ship. So she lands on Mustafar. And just before she lands, you saw the conversation when Palpatine was telling him to shut down all droid units of the Trade Federation. And he said, very good, my lord. And then right after, you see Padme land. Obviously, he never got a chance to do that because after that, he got in a big fight with Obi-Wan and boom. So he never sent the transmission. So I'm guessing at some point after the movie, they did it. Whatever. But I think that's the movie just saying that, yeah, it may not have happened then, but at some point it's going to happen. That's just the movie saying the Clone War is officially over because now Palpatine, along with his followers and the clone army, are in power. But now Padme lands, Anakin goes outside, and they have that conversation. And then you see, this is when Padme starts to realize, wow, Obi-Wan's right. He really has changed. This is when she starts to realize it. And at this point, Anakin is rationalizing, and he's trying to plead with her, saying, follow me. We'll take over the Chancellor. We'll take over the Republic. We'll control things and make things the way we want them to be. I'll save you. I won't lose you the way I lost my mother. I become more powerful than any other Jedi. I'm doing it for you, to protect you. He's just being so selfish, so greedy. At this point, he cares less, by Palpatine's design, about saving Padme's life and more about the power he's attained. And she sees that, and that's why she says, I don't know you no more. You're breaking my heart. But she tries to plead with him one last time. Come back, I love you. And then that's when he sees Obi-Wan on the ship. Liar! You were with him. You brought me here to kill me. Now he thinks Padme brought me here to kill him. Obi-Wan's turned her against him. All that. He chokes Padme. She passes out. He says, you turn her against me. Obi-Wan's like, you've done that yourself, which is true. Obi-Wan didn't do anything. Like, he actually believed in Anakin. He didn't do anything to Anakin, but Anakin is rationalizing everything he did, and now he's putting it all on Obi-Wan. And this is the start of the true division between him and Obi-Wan. Why Vader hated Obi-Wan above anyone else. The greatest sword fight in cinematic history now takes place. And let me tell you, the choreography, the skills, everything is so well done. They trained for months to do this fight. It's so well done, so well choreographed, and Nick Gilliard did such a good job. We get to the part with the collection arm. This is the second time that Spielberg actually came in and helped George with the movie a little bit. It was the scene when the collection arm falls and it's floating, which is pretty spectacular. You talk about visual storytelling. That's pretty freaking awesome to look at. You see all the lava coming up. And another thing to talk about is a lot of what that is there on Mustafar. It's a combination of actual real footage taken from the erupting volcano in Italy, Mount Etna. They took footage during the day, during night. So when you saw the lava geyser come up and was melting the arm, that lava wasn't real. But when it cuts to the scene where you see the volcano exploding, that was a real eruption that they cropped into the shot. And it looks real. That's really cool. And of course they used that footage and they probably copied it, and you see all that in the open shot paintings in the background of the movie when you see all the volcanoes erupting in the background and stuff. Yeah, it's very, very talented. That yes, this is all mostly CGI, but not always, because this is another model set that they built. So on that facility that Anakin and Obi-Wan are fighting on, that was an actual model that they built. They made the lava out of methacil, which is a food additive, and they colored it, dyed it like a lava color, and then they underlit it with lights shining up on it to make it look bright and like lava. And basically that whole sequence there with the lava rivers and stuff, that was a big science project essentially. So that was actually real effects, practical effects and CG effects that created the final shot. The food additive moved faster than what lava actually moves. Lava moves slower than what that food additive did. So George tried to slow it down, but then he went for the faster flow because he thought, even though it's less realistic, it's more exciting. So that was really cool. And then we get to arguably the most memed scene in the whole movie. You know what I'm talking about. It starts with high and ends with ground. The high ground. Look, I get it. It's not a logical choice. It's logical in big battle settings like armies fighting. When you have a high ground on a ridge, you actually have an advantage over your enemy trying to march up to get to you. But in a 1v1 fight, I guess it was hard for people to get around. There's no logic to Star Wars at all. We have sound and space. There's a such thing as movie logic. And I feel like the high ground was the cinematic option that fits the movie better than what Nick Gilliard originally wanted to do. I love Nick Gilliard. He's super good at his job, but this is why stunt coordinator shouldn't have control over big plot points. His job is to come up with a stunt coordination in the fights, but how it ends, that's up to George. And I guess there was a bit of bickering between him and Nick Gilliard of how that fight should end, and a lot of people hated the high ground. But you're telling the story visually, theatricality, spectacle. From what I understand is Nick Gilliard originally wanted to do a thing where Anakin would jump up and land next to Obi-Wan, and then they have like a little bout, and he actually beats Obi-Wan, and he's like, this is the end for you, my master. And he goes in, and then Obi-Wan comes up, and I guess what he does is he cuts off his arm and comes in and cuts off the other two legs, and then he falls down the hill. I guess that's more of a logical choice of how to end it, but seeing Anakin charge Obi-Wan like a bull who only sees red And to see Obi-Wan cut his legs like that was more cinematic because there's a personal thing going on here. When Obi-Wan first jumps up there, he's like, it's over, Anakin, I had the high ground, don't try it. But he knows his former apprentice more than anyone. He knew he would. Anakin's like, this is the end for you, my master. That whole scene was more personal. I feel like what Nick Gillard would have done would have taken away the personal aspect of it, and it also would have taken away the cinematic and theatricality aspects of it. With all that said, in the end of the day, I agree with George on the high ground. It was a much better sequence, and it fits the story a lot better. That's the end of that fight. And then we see this sad scene. This was derived from George's backstory. So before George wrote the script for episode 4, he already had the backstory written. And in that backstory, it was just like this. He was on the side of the volcano, whatever, and then he gets burnt up, which explains why he's in this suit with breathing assistance or whatever, right? Artificial breathing. Now we actually see it. And it was a really emotional time for George to put in there because he's like, I remember writing this years ago, decades ago. He wrote that scene decades ago when he gets burnt up. That wasn't made up for this movie. That was written decades ago before episode 4 even came to being. So that was pretty cool. And then that scene, it was a nice touch to see Obi-Wan pick up Anakin's lightsaber, because that same lightsaber he gives to Luke in A New Hope. And then that tragic last line, you were my brother, Anakin, I loved you. Lucas wanted to make it to where Obi-Wan thinks that Anakin's dead. So you see him stay there a while until Anakin is all burnt up and he thinks that he's dead. There's no way he's going to survive, and then he walks away. But of course he did survive because of his anger and rage. I like that. There's a cinematic decision where anger and rage is what killed him, or not killed him, but what kept him alive. When he said, I hate you, a lot of people call that cheesy. That was beautiful acting when you consider everything that's been happening. And then when you connect to episode 4, it's like, this is Anakin just latching on to all that rationalization and putting it on Obi-Wan. And now Obi-Wan became the instrument of his hatred. It always hit me hard, that scene. And it still does today. Even when I watch this movie to do this review, still hits me. I don't think it'll ever hit any less. It just hits me in the chest. Next thing we see Anakin, he's crawling up the mountain. He can actually crawl up now because his glove burnt off, so his mechanical fingers can dig into the dirt, and he's actually crawling up the mountain more. Palpatine comes up and saves him, brings him to Coruscant, to some kind of cybernetics plant, and that's where you see him being built into Vader. And Lucas wanted to make that scene where it was like a Frankenstein monster being made. Palpatine's like Dr. Frankenstein, and Vader is the monster. And he comes up, he is the monster, both physically, but also in his soul, he's a monster now. And then when Palpatine tells Anakin Padme died, he lost the last defense he had against the dark side. Before, what we were seeing was Anakin falling to evil. He turned to the dark side, but he wasn't quite fully evil. He was slowly falling from that point on. This is the point where he becomes primeval. He is evil. He is a monster. But Lucas didn't want you to feel that there was no hope. So Lucas even said in there, the reason he had Padme before she died say there's good in him, because there is. And that was reflected back at us when we watch episode 6, when Luke Skywalker says, I know there's good in you. Let go of your hate. It was that last bit of good in him that allowed his son to redeem it. The reason Padme wasn't able to redeem him is because she was quite literally the instrument to his fall. Tragically, it was because of her that he started those rationalizations, the fall to darkness, doing all these bad things. It wasn't up to her to save him or Obi-Wan. It was his child. So hearing him shout out no, I remember people saying that's cheesy, but I think it's really cool because there's actual emotion in Vader. And then when you go into the original trilogy, you see Vader as the stone cold villain that he is. But in this scene, you see the emotion, you see the man behind the suit. And then I think the last sequence we saw of Anakin, he was standing next to the Emperor, and you see the Death Star. George made a joke about this. George joked that he reached a little bit to put the Death Star in here. He put it to where it's like you could see it's the Death Star, but there's a long way to go to fully build it. It took 20 years for the Death Star to be fully operational. So he joked, he's like, I don't care, I'm reaching. He joked that they had planning problems, supply problems, and they kept going back and forth on the plans and whatever, and they just ran into all these problems building it. He didn't care about the rationalization and the logic of the thing. He cared that it needed to be there because it was yet another element to blend the Revenge of the Sith with the New Hope. So I feel it was necessary. Seeing Vader in the suit was amazing, and what was also really cool is that was actually Hayden Christensen in the suit, and Hayden Christensen said it was a dream come true to actually be the man in the suit. And when they shot that scene, they had like pretty much the whole crew come in, or maybe not the whole crew because this was like several thousand people, but like a bunch of people, like hundreds of people just cram on that set to see that moment. So that was really cool. George really liked to put emphasis on the first breath that Vader took in the suit as Vader reborn into the man behind the mask, essentially. This is Vader being born. He destroyed everything he loves, everything he holds dear, everything he stands for. Even with that, there was still good in him. The love of his mother survived. The love of Padme survived. The love of his children, even though he didn't know they existed, and for the longest time they didn't know that he was their father. And also the love of Obi-Wan, the brotherly love, and Qui-Gon's sacrifice for him. All of that survived collectively as that little ounce of good that stayed with them. And when the time was right, when Luke was ready to face Vader the second time, he exploited that to have him face his demons and say, the time for rationalization's over. Now's the time for you to make the right decision and bring balance to the Force, as you were said to do. The prophecy is that Anakin will bring balance to the Force by destroying the Sith. And even all the bad stuff, all the drama happens, in the end, he does fulfill his destiny. He does destroy the Sith, including the Emperor and himself. And then in the end, I like to think that when he did pass on, he reconnects with those he loves, like Padme and Obi-Wan and his mother. Overall, a brilliant story. So no wonder why Star Wars captured the imaginations of millions upon millions across the world. And every Star Wars fan loves Star Wars for different reasons. There's no such thing as the same Star Wars fan. We each love Star Wars our own way and for our own reasons, because it connects to a broad scope of people. And I've always loved that about Star Wars. So, yeah. That's the end of Anakin's story. Obi-Wan Kenobi's story in this movie, I pretty much said pretty much all of it. I didn't really touch up on his campaign on Utapau. But yeah, basically, Obi-Wan's role in here is to be Anakin's best friend and mentor. Even though he's no longer Anakin's master, he's still his mentor and his best friend. And he still watches out for him, looks after him, guides him the best he can. The best he'll listen anyway, because Anakin's always been one to not listen. That's just Anakin. And at this point, Obi-Wan's just accepted that, and honestly accepted that that's possibly his greatest virtue. After he's chosen to do the campaign on Utapau, on their way, I love that scene where he's briefing Commander Cody of the mission, and I like that. It shows like the relationship between the Jedi and the clone troopers. And then he gets on Utapau, and I love this culture on Utapau. I love this planet of Utapau. I think Utapau's one of my favorite planets in this movie, probably my favorite planet next to Mustafar. A world full of sinkholes, whatever happened. But apparently the idea of this culture is they're a very primitive, organic culture. They are in tune with the nature of their planet, and they also get around using creatures, flying creatures. They have flying creatures that they can fly around, but they also have the Varactals that Boga is. Obi-Wan ends up riding. And it was also kind of cool to see that astromech droids can fly ships by themselves, fly it to the ship and warn Cody and tell him to attack, basically. And then we get to the very exciting part. One of my favorite parts of the movie was when Obi-Wan was riding Boga, the giant lizard. George Lucas loved putting this in there. He always wanted a Jedi to ride some kind of animal besides a tauntaun to give an idea of like a medieval feeling, like a war mount, basically, like a knight on a horse. And it was just cool. A Jedi with his sword on on a really cool bird-like lizard. It was just so exciting. There was a lot more to that sequence. Like, there was a lot more parts where Obi-Wan was riding Boga, probably watching him climb the wall all the way up to that high point that he was looking at earlier in the movie. But George realized that the stories just started to get a little lost. So, as he puts it, they had to cut down the fun a little bit because they were just having a lot of fun with it, but they needed to get him to the destination because the story was getting lost. And he also, when he's sneaking up on Grievous in that little hangar, he really liked that soundtrack, that special soundtrack that John Williams made for that. It's like a little eerie, sneaky sound, but it's also got the familiar Star Wars theme. And then when he jumps down and says hello there, that was meant to reflect what he says as an older man in episode 4. Ewan McGregor is trying to be closer to Alec Guinness than he ever was to blend episode 3 and episode 4. So he looks more like Alec Guinness with his beard and his hair, and then now how his voice is, how his acting is. Not only are we seeing Anakin transform into Darth Vader, we're also seeing Ewan McGregor transform into Alec Guinness. So that was pretty cool. And then the fight with Grievous is fantastic. This idea of 4 swords, and it was very difficult to shoot. They had to shoot it in 2 different sections because Grievous was actually a stunt man in a blue suit and animated Grievous over it. So they had to animate a section where he was attacking from above, and then they had to animate a second section where he was attacking from below, and it was just difficult. But by the end, they really did capture this idea that Obi-Wan was fighting this guy with 4 arms. But since it was so hard to coordinate and choreograph, they had to cut off 2 of the arms quite quickly. I guess that was one of the few times that they were kind of limited. The time that we got with the 4 arms was still quite cool. Then when Obi-Wan's chasing Grievous while he's on his wheel bike, that was actually the first scene, from my understanding, that Steven Spielberg had a hand in. George Lucas explains it that Spielberg got bored, so he let Spielberg storyboard that sequence a little bit. And so Steven Spielberg worked with the editor, and what they ended up coming up with was that chase sequence, like in the hallway and stuff. That was Spielberg, from my understanding, which is quite awesome and quite bizarre. Oh, and also the chase sequence, like flying down on that ball-like structure and sliding, and then he loses his lightsaber. And that's another thing, is George keeps up that whole gag of Jedi losing their lightsabers, like it's still continuing. But it's funny seeing Obi-Wan lose his lightsaber and not Anakin. Once we get to the platform where he actually fights Grievous, George thought it would be funny to have Obi-Wan fight Grievous with the staff, because it's not a weapon that Jedi normally use. But most importantly, it was more funny to see him use the gun to kill Grievous. He thought it'd be interesting and funny because the blaster is the weapon that Jedi disdain. Seeing him kill Grievous with it and then so uncivilized and throw it away, it was just a kind of a gag thing. And then when Obi-Wan says, "I have a bad feeling about this," earlier on in the movie, that was another gag. Like that line is in every single Star Wars movie, every one, from my understanding, because it was meant to be just kind of a gag line. Now we get to Order 66. Obi-Wan goes to Cody. Cody gives him his lightsaber. "Oh, by the way, I think you'd be needing this." And then Order 66 happens. Super sad seeing Boga die, but very effective emotionally, obviously. And he escapes in Grievous's ship. He gets picked up by Senator Bail Organa. He meets Yoda, because Yoda went through the same thing on Kashyyyk, and they agree to go to Coruscant to reverse the beacon in the temple that's telling the Jedi to come back to the temple because the war's over, luring him into the trap to be killed. So they went to the Jedi temple to reverse that. And when they get to the temple, I have to say, it was very interesting seeing the Jedi fight clones this time. We've seen Jedi fight like droids and stuff like that, but we've never seen them fight like stormtroopers or clones in the new Jedi style that we see in the prequels. So that was actually really cool. That little fight sequence with the clones I thought was cool. And then we get into the Jedi Temple, and that whole thing that Obi-Wan and Yoda see in there was pretty horrifying as a teenager. Seeing all the dead Jedi, they obviously reversed the transmission to tell the surviving Jedi to stay away. That's when Obi-Wan found out Anakin turned to the dark side, and that was kind of sad. You know, Ian McGregor's acting in that scene was pretty great. I felt that Obi-Wan felt betrayed that his closest friend is now an agent of evil, and he gets to Padme's apartment. Padme obviously won't tell Obi-Wan where he is, especially when Obi-Wan basically said, yeah, I'm gonna kill Anakin. She doesn't want that. She wants answers. And then he finds out that she's pregnant. Well, he knew she was pregnant, and then it's like, Anakin's the father, isn't he? I find that interesting that he didn't figure that out sooner. But then when Padme goes to Mustafar, Obi-Wan gets on the ship. We already talked about this. And then after the fight, like, before I continue, during the fight, when they're on the lava river, I love that scene when Obi-Wan says, I have failed you, Anakin, I have failed you. Because it shows that Obi-Wan realizes he did fail Anakin. He didn't do everything he could. At least he feels that way. There's nothing he could do about Anakin's choice, but he realizes what he failed to do. And it's a mistake that he won't make again when he watches over Luke, because he does end up putting Luke on the right path. So I really like that. Now we're on Post Massa when Padme gives birth to the twins. She names the twins. They find out that she's dying. They don't know why. She's lost the will to live. Women die due to complications of pregnancy, for one. That's what I always thought it was. I think it was meant to be a combination of that, plus she did die of a broken heart, and maybe that caused the complication of the pregnancy, which is why she died. Since this is a fantasy movie, I don't think it's much of a reach, really, to have Padme die of a broken heart. So I think that fits very well with this movie, in my opinion, of course. He agrees to watch over Luke and take him to Owen and Beru Lars on Tatooine. He also learns Qui-Gon has returned from another world of the Force from Yoda. Qui-Gon has learned a path of immortality. Yoda will teach Obi-Wan how to commune with him, and it's obvious that's during the time from episode 3 to episode 4, and perhaps during episode 4 off screen, he was communicating with Qui-Gon off screen. Originally there was going to be more into that, where Yoda was meditating with the Force, and then once Qui-Gon comes into Yoda's head and tells him all of this, you actually hear Qui-Gon's voice. In the end, I like that George removed that. I'll tell you why. I get it. It's good to get explanation when you can, but I think I like it better that it's hinted at rather than fully explained to you of how Qui-Gon learned the path of immortality. And it's obviously has something to do with the midichlorians. Your connection with the Force with your midichlorians, you're basically able to transfer your entire body from the physical world to the netherworld of the Force, is essentially what they're talking about here. Qui-Gon only learned how to make his soul immortal. He couldn't come back as a Force ghost because he didn't have his body there. His body was burned. Obi-Wan and Yoda were the first two to do it. And that's another thing is, well, how did Vader become a Force ghost? I don't know if it was explained, but I like to think that when he died, his spirit came to the netherworld of the Force. Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan, and Yoda were already there. They told him how to do it. And before Luke burned his body, he transferred his body to the world of the Force. So what Luke actually burned was just the suit. You couldn't tell because it was the suit, but his body in the suit was already gone. He was just burning the suit. That's my headcanon. Basically what I'm saying is I like it better that it's hinted at than explained to you. It gives us something to think about. We don't need every little thing explained. George liked to make things where you think about things or come up with your own way of how it works or put the pieces together yourself. And then in that final scene, we see Obi-Wan give baby Luke to Aunt Beru and Uncle Owen. And that scene was actually shot during episode 2. And then they kept that shot and cut it in episode 3. Because in episode 3, the only time they ever went to Tatooine was at the end. Lucas did it that way so that he didn't have to go back there, move a whole crew just to shoot one little 20-second shot. He said he might as well have done it in Attack of Clones when that was the last time he'd ever be there. Another thing about Ewan McGregor and Obi-Wan is Dennis Lawson, the guy who does Wedge Antilles in the original Star Wars trilogy. Dennis Lawson is Ewan McGregor's uncle. And Ewan McGregor said when he saw Star Wars, he was just excited to see Uncle Dennis. And he also loves Star Wars, but it was cool to see his uncle in the story. That's pretty much Obi-Wan's story. Padme's story has pretty much already been explained. The only other thing I want to talk about with Padme, when she was first telling Anakin that she was pregnant, if you notice, her hair actually is reminiscent of Leia Leia's hair in episode 4. So that was another way of blending episode 3 with episode 4. You'll notice that in that scene, when she first reveals she's pregnant with Leia and Luke, she has Leia's hair, but it's more elegant in this scene because she's a senator, whereas Leia's version of that hairdo is more like rebellious, like
something wonderful has happened.
that was pretty cool. Another thing I want to say is Rick McCallum, the producer of the Star Wars prequel trilogy, has said that there's a big misconception with how the prequels have been made, you know, because the critics have been criticizing the prequels for overuse of CGI, no sets, all blue screen. The audience doesn't seem to realize how much of the prequels actually are big sets. He went on to iterate that in this movie there are at least 72 large sets. But every set, since you're on like in a fictional world with planets and stuff, there's a lot of blue screen on the sets because, for example, you can't be looking out the window in Palpatine's office and see a real city. You gotta see Coruscant. So the set is actually built. There's just a lot of blue screen because you gotta put Coruscant in the blue screen or Mustafar in the blue screen or something. But like there's a lot of actual real sets that were actually built. And one of those sets, there was an actual full set that was built in Padme's apartment. It was when Anakin was telling Padme, Obi-Wan's been here, hasn't he? That scene, when she goes into her bedroom, that was the same set that they had for episode 2, or a rebuilt version of it, but it was rebuilt to be exactly like it was in episode 2. So that was a full set. Episode 2 even had full sets. Every single one of them had full sets. It's just there was a lot of blue screen because you're in fictional worlds. Yoda's story, the only other things I could talk about with Yoda is his campaign on Kashyyyk. That was super cool. We got to see Chewbacca again, for one, and his buddy Tarful. I'm not sure if that's his dad or something, or if that's just the chief of his tribe. Chewbacca is like the co-chief of the tribe or something, but that's definitely Chewbacca, and Peter Mayhew, I think his name is in the suit again as Chewbacca. That was really cool. I love to see the Wookiee homeworld. It was based off of like a lot of Asian countries like China, Thailand, and all that. They actually went and took pictures and videos of all the landscapes, and they took all those elements. So when you look at the Wookiee homeworld, it's basically China, Thailand, and other Asian countries composited together. So that was really cool, and seeing that battle on the beachhead was amazing. Seeing the Wookiees fight with the clones, massive battle, seeing the droids come out of the water, and the Wookiees attacking the droids and stuff off of the little dragonfly skiffs. And that's another thing is like, I like how George puts more creatures in the prequel trilogy. So like in on Utapau, we saw like the flying mounts that they have. You only saw a glimpse of them. I would have loved to see more of a flying mount, see it in combat and stuff. But you know, you see Obi-Wan on Boga, the lizard mount. I noticed on Kashyyyk, their Wookiees also ride animals. There's like this little dragon creature. I think George Lucas said that he was going to have more of the dragon creature in the movie, but they cut it out. There's a dragon creature on Kashyyyk. You actually see one fly when you first see Kashyyyk. It was flying right next to one of the dragon wing skiffs. So Wookiees also ride like animal mounts, so that was pretty cool. Seeing Yoda fight Palpatine was pretty cool. Again, like I said, each lightsaber fight is different. There's a lot of lightsaber fights in this movie specifically. Star Wars typically doesn't have lightsaber fights like this. Each lightsaber fight was meant to have its own personality. And so watching Yoda and Palpatine fight, it was like watching the Masters fight. The Master of Evil, Master of Good fight each other. The reason it was slow at first before it got really quick at the end is because they were like feeling each other out because they knew that they were both powerful. It was also funny watching Yoda just force slam those red guards against the wall. I liked when Yoda said "Into exile must go," basically saying he's got to go to Dagobah. That was a deleted scene, was you actually saw where he actually went to Dagobah. So that was cool, and I wish they would have kept that in there. Just like the Rebel Alliance scenes, Padme was talking to the senators scenes, I really liked. That's pretty much Yoda's story. Senator Bail Organa actually had a small subplot in this story. He was a major player in the Rebel Alliance subplot that got removed. But then he also had a pretty big part to play in saving Yoda and Obi-Wan from the clones. Like, he gave them sanctuary in the Tantive 4, flew them into Coruscant so that they could go to the Jedi Temple and all that, housed them in Post Massa. Senator Bail Organa of Alderaan became the adopted father of Leia, so he had a little more involvement. Bail Organa is a friend of the Jedi. Apart from Padme Amidala, he's one of the few senators that the Jedi trust. I like that part where he goes to the Jedi Temple during Order 66 and he's like, what's going on here? And the clones are, there's been a rebellion, sir, the situation's under control. And then once a Jedi comes out, and that Jedi is actually played by Jet Lucas, George Lucas's son, and then he gets killed and then you see Bail Organa, no! So it's obvious that this took a hit on him too. And then he vowed to save what Jedi he could from this catastrophe, and he ended up saving Yoda and Obi-Wan, and then took Leia in as his own. That's the last we saw Bail Organa. It was cool to see him have a bigger role in this. Hope survives tragedy. This episode is very dark. So much tragedy, so much betrayal, so much darkness, but in the end, there's still hope. And the movie ends with that. It ends with the bad guys taking over. The bad guys won, but there's still hope in the galaxy, and I love that. Let's talk deleted scenes. The first deleted scene, I agree with being removed, and that is the death of Shaak Ti and the Jedi escaping Grievous. So this scene, you saw Shaak Ti die. I get it. I like that. There's a lot of parts in the scene I like, but I liked it more removed because overall the scene just does nothing for the movie. It feels like it shouldn't be there. It doesn't flow well with the movie. Plus they explain later about General Grievous's lightsaber collection on the bridge scene. Even though seeing Shaak Ti was an interesting flavor to put in the movie, like right away a Jedi died, and it kind of introduces this darker theme that people are dying in this movie, but in the end we didn't really need it in there. It wasn't necessary, and it just kind of took away from the flow of the movie. So I see why he removed it. You had this whole thing where after Shaak Ti died, they cut a hole in the ground, they go into the fuel tank, they get out of the fuel tank, it blows up just before they sealed the hole they just climbed through, and then you got this big bolt. It seemed to be more of a joke than actually have any importance, so I'm glad it was removed. The second deleted scene wasn't really a deleted scene. It was an original version of a scene that got remade and put later in the movie. It was basically the first version of when Mace Windu said, I sense a plot to destroy the Jedi. The dark side of the Force surrounds the Chancellor. It was between Mace Windu, Yoda, and Obi-Wan in the Jedi Temple in this little room. They said word for word pretty much exactly what was said later when Windu said the same thing and then sent Anakin to tell the Chancellor that Obi-Wan has engaged General Grievous. The only difference was Obi-Wan wasn't there. Obi-Wan was basically replaced with Ki-Adi-Mundi. So it was between Ki-Adi-Mundi, Windu, and Yoda, but the same stuff was said. So, and that scene was just a lot better. It was more visually appealing. It was in the war room and you saw the little holograms. Overall, I agree, and I'm happy that it was removed and remade. However, all the other deleted scenes in here, I wish would have stayed, but I understand why George removed them. To be clear, he removed them because either A, in the case of the Rebel Alliance scenes, he removed them because he needed to focus more on Anakin's story, which I get it. And then the Yoda scene, he didn't think it was necessary to show. It was just an extra 30 seconds of things that you didn't need to see because you know where Yoda ends up. It was more important to show the two Skywalker children where they end up. I agree with that, actually. But I still like Yoda's scene. Even though I agree with it, I also think if you would have left it, it wouldn't have taken anything away from the movie. That's how I also feel about the Rebel Alliance scenes. I actually love those scenes because they show more Padme's story and they show a little more that there's actual resistance within the Senate against Palpatine. And there's three of them. They call it's the trilogy of the Rebel Alliance scenes. The first one, Padme is a little reluctant to join, but she agrees to join their little group to try and gain gain more senators on their side. The second one, she says Padme is actually asking her senator friends, what if we got the Jedi in on it? Then they say, I think it's better to not include the Jedi on this. And then she says, but what about a Jedi I trust? She, of course, was talking about Anakin. And I think that scene would have taken place just before she was talking to Anakin about, do you think we're fighting on the right side? Because she was wearing the same costume. And then when Anakin said, don't ask me to do that, make a notion in the Senate where that kind of request belongs, I think that just kind of proved to Padme, even though I love Anakin, I can't really trust him with this. So she never told him about it. And then the third scene was actually probably the best one of this trilogy. You know, the buildup is all at once Padme, Mon Mothma, Organa, and the other senators that are part of this rebel alliance behind the scenes actually go to Palpatine's office and try to plead with him to stop the war and seek a diplomatic solution with the separatists. He, of course, says, you must trust me, you must trust I know what's right, and all that, just like any corrupt bureaucrat says. Anakin's actually in the room during this conversation because he's standing behind the Chancellor's desk because he's the representative of the Jedi Council, so he was there. After Padme leaves, Palpatine's actually trying to corrupt Anakin against Padme, saying she can't be trusted. Anakin was like, surely you can't be mistaken, and blah blah blah. I just think those were really good scenes. They were short enough that I just felt like they would have added more to the story and wouldn't have really taken away the flow. I feel like those actually belong there. But in the end, I accept what George Lucas did. The movie is still perfect as is. If he would have let those scenes in there, it would have just made them more perfect. So the movie's still perfect. George Lucas is a progressive movie maker. In each of the prequel trilogy and even in the previous original Star Wars trilogy, he took the entire production time, 3 to 3.5 years it took to make the movie. He would work on every single scene throughout that entire time, non-stop, until they were done making the movie, all the way to the end. And that's why it just seems like so much care was taken to make it, because there was. He would keep going through every scene and saying, actually, I think I'd like this. I think I'd like this. We should change this. We should add this, blah, blah, blah. He would never stop working. He just kept dreaming and adding on and building. He would go on the scenes and say, we need to redo the scene because we need to add these things and these things. Yeah, he's just so good. He also works with his team really well, jokes, laughs, and builds good relationships. He likes to encourage his team to be free with their imagination and come up with ideas to him, and he'll either use those ideas or not. But that's how he likes to direct, is he likes it where people feel that they could express themselves as well as him. I remember hearing him say, while during the movie process, he said that he really appreciated a lot of the planets, but one planet in particular is Felucia, because the planet Felucia was more of a fantasy-like world, where most of the planets, if not all the planets that he had, were like reality-like, a biome that was more reality. This one was like, Felucia looked like a fantasy world, so he enjoyed that. I also want to mention, I can't believe I didn't open the review with this, but I want to mention that I remember age 14 sitting in that movie theater, first seeing the opening crawl, thinking I knew this was it, because before I saw the movie, I saw all the commercials and stuff and all the news of George interviews saying this is it, there is no episode 7, he's done, this is the last one, the saga ends. At the time it did. I remember seeing that, knowing this is the last one, how emotional and how awesome it was, and seeing everything come to a close. Ironically, Revenge of the Sith didn't just close out the prequel trilogy, it felt like it was an ending to the original trilogy. It felt like it was the ending of Star Wars, because we already know what happens in the original trilogy. This movie ties it all together. That felt like a real ending to me somehow, even though it was technically the prequel. It was the ending to Star Wars, because I have already seen the originals, and seeing how these two trilogies connect was closure for me. Now I gotta talk about John Williams' musical score.
So after 25 years, we need to do it again.
He's God. He's a genius. He's amazing. I love John Williams. We all know what he's known for. He's made so many beautiful, memorable themes. The Jurassic Park theme, the Star Wars theme, Indiana Jones, Jaws, and many, many more. The Hymn of the Fallen from Saving Private Ryan. He even did The Patriot, starring Mel Gibson. This guy is a genius. He did Superman, the main theme. In episode 1, I would say Duel of the Fates blew us away. Across the Stars blew us away in episode 2, but in this one, the whole damn soundtrack blows us away. This whole soundtrack is beautiful from beginning to end. If I were to name some outstanding songs, like standout songs, I would probably say Anakin vs. Obi-Wan, Battle for the Heroes, Anakin's Betrayal, and Anakin's Dark Deeds. But I love the whole soundtrack. It's so unique and so dark. I love Palpatine's teachings that plays during Palpatine telling Anakin about Darth Plagueis. I like Padme's Ruminations that have that really eerie female vocalization that plays during the moment that Anakin was staring off across Coruscant and Padme is staring across Coruscant and they were having that moment. The soundtrack in this movie is the best soundtrack I've ever heard in any movie. This is the movie soundtrack. As I said before, you couldn't choose anyone better than John Williams to compose Star Wars. One last thing I want to talk about before I close this review out is the symbolism of the weapons in this movie series. George Lucas said that the lightsaber represents a more honorable and traditional way to fight, whereas the blaster represents the more modern weapon of dishonor and disrespectful ways of fighting. So I like the fact that he puts themes behind the weapons. George Lucas is a genius. George Lucas is my favorite movie director. He's also inspired me growing up as a kid. I grew up watching the bonus feature DVDs. I remember watching his interviews in the beginning of each of the original trilogy One Last Time movies back there. Got to know George Lucas very well based on all of that footage. I remember one time in elementary school, I dressed up as George Lucas for a research paper that we had to present in front of the class, and you had to dress up as your historical character or your famous person. And I chose George Lucas, and I had my dad use that Halloween spray paint and spray painted my hair gray. I already had the glasses. I put on a flannel shirt and put like plastic bags to make me look like I had some weight on me, and just had tennis shoes because George Lucas just wears plain old tennis shoes wherever he goes. And then I had a fake beard on. I love George Lucas, and I'm truly grateful to him for creating such a wonderful film franchise. And I want to shout out the wonderful impact he's had in movies. He pioneered visual effects twice. Once in the 70s, second time with the prequels in the 90s and early 2000s. And he changed the way movies were made going forward. Both times. Never forget the impact that he had on the movies that you now love and enjoy, and just movies in general. How many directors that you probably don't know are actually inspired by him, like he was inspired by so many directors before. Stanley Kubrick, Kurosawa, and his friend Francis Ford Coppola, and even his best friend Steven Spielberg. I thank George, and I'm grateful. What an awesome adventure it was to experience his movies as they came out back when he was the head of Lucasfilm. It's something that we'll never see again, and I'm grateful for it. To sum up this review, this movie is perfect. Even with the minor things I disagreed with George on, it doesn't deteriorate it from being a perfect movie. It just would have been more perfect if he did those things a little differently. But at the end of the day, this is a perfect movie. We will never get a movie like this again. We will never get movies like the prequel trilogy. The reason that the reputation of the prequels has gotten better is because we're getting older, the ones who love this growing up. Each trilogy is generation, and perhaps the reputation of the Disney sequel trilogy will get better. Maybe. We'll see. And I'm glad that in my lifetime that the prequel trilogy's reputation is healed. This movie blew me away when I was a teenager, and it still blows me away. It still holds up. The visual effects are still beautiful. The story is perfect and amazing. The creative decisions, the creativity, the artistic style and design, you couldn't ask for any better. So with that closes this review. And I ask all of you, what are your thoughts on this movie? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Or are you somewhere in between? Please let me know in the comments section. Thank you so much for watching this video. Please like and subscribe. I will see you next time, and be ready to be judged.